George H.W. Bush became the 41st President of the United States in January 1989. It was a very historic occasion for many reasons. It was exactly 2 centuries since George Washington first became President. In the meantime, the country had grown from a population of 4 million to 250 million. It had also expanded massively from the original 13 states to now 50 states. Its main rival, the Soviet Union, was in a state of collapse, which meant that America had become by far the most powerful and influential nation in the world. In regard to foreign affairs, George Bush was confronted with a number of major challenges. As the Soviet Union broke up, several Eastern European countries began to look for their own independence. The Soviet Union had lost control of East Germany, which meant that German unification was soon to emerge as an important issue. In 1989, Bush's first year as president, the communist countries of Eastern Europe began to break away. This was one of the most dramatic developments of the 20th century, and it happened so fast, no one saw it coming. The Soviet leader Gorbachev refused to send the Soviet army to quell riots in Eastern Europe, and as a result, he quickly lost control of the situation. Over the next couple of years, 15 states emerged from the breakup of the Union. Russia, with its massive population and control of nuclear weapons, was by far the largest and most powerful. In November 1989, the Berlin Wall was torn down. The following month, Bush met Gorbachev at the Malta summit. They discussed how the Soviet Union could be shifted towards a more democratic, market-based economy. The reunification of Germany was also discussed. This was an immensely difficult issue for Gorbachev. Germany had wreaked havoc on the Soviet Union in the Second World War only 45 years earlier. 23 million Russians had lost their lives. Cruel memories were still in people's minds about the war. After the war, Stalin had demanded control of several buffer states in Eastern Europe to protect the Soviet Union. Now Gorbachev was confronted with a demand for a unified Germany and a possible breakup of the buffer zone. Germany agreed to pay billions of mark compensation and Gorbachev reluctantly agreed to German unity. He also agreed to hold elections the following year in May 1990. This in turn added momentum to the powerful nationalist movements demanding independence. Gorbachev initially tried to suppress these movements but found the momentum towards change unstoppable. In early 1991, he still hoped to hold the Union together. In July 1991, he met Bush and they agreed the START I treaty in regard to nuclear weapons. They also discussed the demand for independence by the Eastern European states. In August 1991, Bush made his famous Kiev Speech in Ukraine, in which he supported the Gorbachev approach. Bush warned against the emergence of suicidal nationalism after the breakup. At this stage, both leaders believed the Soviet Union could survive in a more democratic and smaller form. However, they were out of touch with the times. Eastern European states wanted freedom and independence. Like Ronald Reagan, they recognized the evil of communism. Ukraine in particular had cruel memories of famine created by Stalin as he stole their land and starved their people. 3 weeks later, on the 20th of August 1991, Ukraine proclaimed their own declaration of independence. Some of the smaller states had already done so. Eastern Europe wanted an end to Soviet domination in any forum. The media called Bush's speech in August the Chicken Kiev Speech. Bush was trying to support Gorbachev's plan for a smaller democratic union and knew that the situation could become extremely violent. A couple of weeks later, there was an attempt by hardline communists in the Soviet Union to overthrow Gorbachev. He survived the event but was forced to resign as secretary of the Communist Party. A few months later, in December 1991, Gorbachev resigned as president of the Soviet Union as the Union itself fell apart. Most people were happy to see this development as they knew it was built on mass murder and theft from the start. In the aftermath of the Soviet collapse, 15 states emerged to seek their own independence. Russia, with its control of nuclear weapons, was by far the most important, and Boris Yeltsin, as its president, became the new most prominent figure. He met Bush in February 1992 to declare a new era of friendship between the two nations, Russia and the United States. In January 1993, they met again and agreed the START II treaty, which agreed a 30% reduction in nuclear weapons by both powers. In regard to the Middle East, Saddam Hussein, the Iraqi leader, invaded Kuwait on the 2nd of August 1990. He seemed to believe that the US was too distracted by events in Europe to take action. However, his invasion of Kuwait was both a threat to oil supplies and a violation of the United States Charter. Bush therefore set out to lead a coalition of nations to oppose this invasion. Economic sanctions were tried at first, but they led nowhere as Saddam ignored them. In November 1990, the United Nations authorized the use of force against Iraq if they did not leave Kuwait by the 15th of January 1991. In January 1991, the US Congress also approved war against Iraq. In late January, the United Nations force attacked Iraq. A month later, the coalition launched a ground offensive in Kuwait itself. After just 4 days, Iraq was forced to withdraw from Kuwait. 300 US soldiers died in the conflict, and 30,000 Iraqi soldiers died also, as well as 150 Iraqi civilians also lost their lives in this conflict. In relation to Central America, in the 1980s, Manuel Noriega had become military dictator of Panama. Although Noriega had previously worked for the CIA, by the mid-80s he was no longer trusted as he began to share intelligence with other foreign agencies and became involved in drug trafficking. It was also believed that he could pose a threat to the use of the Panama Canal. Bush ordered a force of 10,000 soldiers into Panama to have him arrested. However, this action was condemned by the United Nations. In regard to international trade, NAFTA, the NAFTA negotiations took place mainly during the Bush presidency, although they started during the Reagan presidency, of course. NAFTA, the North Atlantic Free Trade Association. Bush rejected some of the proposals put forward in order to speed up the process going through Congress. The North Atlantic Free Trade Agreement actually was quite important and expanded trade in the US between the US, Mexico and Canada. Bush signed the treaty in December 1992, but it wasn't ratified by the Senate until 12 months later under the Clinton presidency. In relation to domestic affairs, the Reagan years had increased the federal debt from $740 billion to about $2.4 trillion. This meant that Bush needed to reduce the debt, but was committed to not raising taxes during the campaign. However, by June 1990, he agreed with Congress to raise taxes, which probably cost him the next election in 1992 against Clinton. Bush also pushed for the Americans and Disabilities Act through Congress in 1990. This was an important act, and it forbade discrimination based on disability in regard to employment in the public services. The President also signed the Clean Air Act of 1990. This act focused on areas such as urban smog, acid rain, and industrial emissions. Congress was conscious of the environmental issues after the enormous oil spill off the Alaska coast the previous year. George H.W. Bush lacked the great communication skills of Ronald Reagan and was defeated in the November 1992 election by Bill Clinton. However, he was a president at a time of enormous change and turbulence in the world. He managed the collapse of the Soviet Union and recognized the danger of the new emerging nationalism in the Balkans. He also oversaw with great diplomatic skill the reunification of Germany. The defeat of Saddam Hussein, of course, in the First Gulf War was also a very significant achievement. Overall, he was considered a decent man and an above-average president. He died in Houston, Texas on the 30th of November 2018 at the age of 94.